Let's bring in Bob Costas from Football Night in America, Major League Baseball Network. We were talking about Chris Berman interviewing the president and Mitt Romney last night. How many presidents have you interviewed?
Well, let's see. Reagan at halftime of the Fiesta Bowl between Penn State and Miami, 1987, I guess. Ford, when he was out of office, was on the Later Show. Never Jimmy Carter. Both Presidents Bush, so that's 4. Clinton. Obama, 6, I guess.
Pretty good.
And a few candidates, a few defeated candidates, like George McGovern, who was one of the greatest men I've ever had the privilege of knowing. Doesn't make any difference how you feel about politics. I think if you took any conservative who served with George McGovern, they would say this was a man of decency and honor, who was above some of the kind of politics that we see everywhere now.
I agree, and his name came up in conversation a couple of days ago, and the number of people who knew about him. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is how much he lost by. But I think the common decency that he had, was something. It's like Jimmy Carter, a decent man. I think sometimes that's lost in this whole political machine. Yeah,
you're right. And, you were talking about the art of the interview, if it is an art, and just to maybe get off on a tangent here, but it might be interesting. I was just reminded, I spoke to McGovern's probably 20 years or so ago, and the kind of interview that later was, he had a lot of time. It was at least a full half hour with a guest and maybe more if you taped it double, so you could go down some back streets. And he talked about his love of baseball, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, his father was a Methodist minister. So this would have been maybe as young McGovern is growing up sometime in the 1920s, 1930s, and he's on a farm. And apparently his dad had played some baseball at like the semi-pro level or something in his youth. But ball players at the turn of the century were considered in polite society to be ruffians. It was just something you didn't do. And then the father went on to become a minister. Anyway, the father picks up a rock and throws the rock at something or other on the farm. And the boy marvels at how well he threw it and how natural and fluid the motion was. And he said it was only then, at like age 10, that his father told him that he had been a baseball player of some account. And you can imagine the wide eyes on the boy and looking at his dad in a different light. But it wasn't something the family talked about because it was kind of a shady thing to have been a ball player at the turn of the century. Now, that's never the first question you'd ask somebody in an interview. It's about the 30th. But it might have been one of the most interesting things that came out.
Well, that's what I said about Chris Berman last night. And I know it's a no-win situation if you have that kind of time frame. But the point that I made was have fun with them and get them off the narrative. Let them tell you something that actually feels like they're a sports fan, that they're passionate, that they have a memory, a team that broke their heart, their, that first game they remembered. I don't care about policy. I don't care about the script. But how do you go about doing that? If you were going to sit down with them last night, first question you would have for Obama is what?
Well, I think you laid out the kind of questions a few minutes ago that you'd want to ask. Everybody says they get a thrill from meeting a president coming to the White House. Which of these athletes, which of these teams actually made your heart skip a beat? Who have you met in sports where you didn't say to yourself, hey, I'm the president of the United States? You said, I'm a kid. I'm wide-eyed. Who?
I like that. But it's always tough to get them sort of off their game a little bit because here they are. They've been knee-deep in all of this campaign rhetoric, and now you got the election today, and that's where you want them to go, why don't you exhale? Have you ever had to give your questions to somebody prior to the interview?
No, I can't think of any situation where that has ever happened. There have been times when I've said to interview subjects, people with whom I have a relationship, you realize that there are issues on the table here. And it's nothing personal, but I'm going to ask everything that I think I should ask. And in every instance, they always say, ask away, including Jerry Jones this past weekend.
Well, that's what I wanted you to do to help if you can, because people who want to get in this business, I want them to understand the process. If we could take a break, Bob, and bring you back, I want to ask you about just really the start and finish, with Jerry Jones, how you approach that interview. Continuing with Bob Costas, Football Night in America, also the Major League Baseball Network. Before I get to the art of the interview with Jerry Jones, Josh Hamilton, and if you're the Rangers, and the last I look, he's looking for a 7-year deal. What do you think is going to happen with Josh Hamilton, given on the field, off the field?
I have to say I have no particular insight into this. It's not like I've spoken to John Daniels or anybody in the Rangers organization lately about this. they've got to consider not only his off-the-field issues, which sometimes come up, and this would be considered sympathetically. Nobody thinks that Josh Hamilton is a bad guy. He battled back from addiction. He relapsed. He acknowledged that he came back. But still, it's a risk, and it's a risk that comes with a high price tag. Plus, teams are shying away from signing people to long-term deals that take them into their mid-30s or beyond, because we see what's happened now with players declining and people being stuck with these contracts. So it might be a little bit too rich for Texas's blood, and they have a team that scores a lot of runs as it is. Not that you wouldn't miss Josh Hamilton, but it isn't as if they couldn't carry on and contend without him. So I haven't really answered your question because I don't know the answer, but I know that it isn't a no-brainer for them. There's going to be a tipping point, and they're going to have to decide what that tipping point is.
I see these long-term deals, and I think anything after 5 years, I just have to move on, because we always see what happens. You're holding on to somebody for a couple extra years, and it's going to happen with the Angels with Pujols. It'll happen to Fielder in Detroit. It's happened with A-Rod. It'll happen to every one of these deals. I don't know if you can pinpoint one and say, you know what, that one worked out over a 9-year period.
Yeah, how smart do the Cardinals look now?
Oh, yeah.
Even though it caused a stir, how smart do the Cardinals look for passing on Albert Pujols, for saying, thanks for the memories. You're the one who decided you didn't want to be the latter-day Stan Musial and retire as a Cardinal. Thanks for everything. So long. Alan Craig, go play first base.
And now it looks like Mark McGwire may go to the Dodgers as a hitting coach. I don't know how much credit he'll get for what he's done with those young kids, but chance of going and working with Don Mattingly in the Dodgers, which I found kind of interesting.
Well, not only that, Mark lives in Newport Beach. I mean, he has ties to St. Louis, but his primary home is in Newport Beach, so that gets him back home. In St. Louis, they consider it a done deal that he's gone to the Dodgers, and they do give him a tremendous amount of credit for the offense the Cardinals showed the last couple of years.
I don't want you to take people through the process here. When you sit down, you do these interviews every Sunday night on Football Night in America. This time it was Jerry Jones. So you got a guy who has an agenda, has some information, Jason Garrett's future, Tony Romo's future. When you sit down and you're trying to figure out the first question, give us the process of that and then working your way through the interview, and what do you want to ask as that last question?
Well, in this case, it was actually pretty easy because it's obvious what's on the table. Not only were they 3-4 coming in and now 3-5, but Jason Garrett's coaching has been questioned. The play calling in key situations, especially the clock management toward the end of games. So I just asked him about that, and the way he answered it, of course, as you know, you want to listen to the person. You just don't have a list of questions. After I ask question 1, I'm going to ask question 2 no matter what he says in response. He said, I usually agree with what Jason Garrett does. So I said, well, if you usually agree, then obviously there are times that you don't. And when I hear you talking about the upside as he develops, I hear you saying that he's not yet the coach that you hope he would be. And he acknowledged that. And then he said that he was working on an extension for Tony Romo, which people might have assumed, but until then it wasn't out there, I guess, so that might have made a small amount of news. And that was prompted by me just asking him, look, the guy has an upside, but is he a franchise quarterback? Can he get you to the Super Bowl? And in effect, his answer to that was yes.
Toughest question you think you've had to ask recently?
Oh, toughest question I've had. You know, a lot of times people come back to the Sandusky interview, but those questions were not tough for me to ask. I had no reluctance to ask them. They were the questions that were out there. You know, I never anticipated thinking of someday being Jim McKay or Jack Buck or Vin Scully or hoping to be. I never anticipated that I would ask someone, are you sexually attracted to young boys? That never crossed my radar screen, but that was out there, so that wasn't that difficult to ask.
What if he had been in the room with you?
I wouldn't have made any difference.
Okay.
Wouldn't have made any difference. You know, here's what happens, and I guess it happens in all walks of life, but I think it happens more in sports. You develop relationships with people, and then sometimes there comes a point where, even though this isn't Nightline or Meet the Press, there are times when there are actual issues and news-making items, and you've got to ask a question of someone that you like and have a personal relationship and maybe you've had laughs with. You have to ask them a question that's going to make them uncomfortable or put them on the spot. And yet you do it anyway, but it's not something you necessarily enjoy. But you got to do it.
Have you lost friendships over anything like that?
I don't think so. Jim Valvano, who we all liked very much, was a very close friend of mine. And when some stuff came up at NC State, I don't even remember the particulars anymore because it's 15, 20 years ago, more than 20, I guess. I think he was taken by surprise when I kind of grilled him about it one night on the radio. And I think he was hurt by that. It was kind of that Julius Caesar et tu Brutus thing. Even you were turning on me now. But I wasn't really turning on him. I was just doing what I thought I had to do. And it took a little while before Jim and I were back on good terms, but I'm very thankful that we were before he passed away, and we were close again. And I think he understood that was just something that I had to do. It's one actually recently, the Bobby Valentine thing on the NBC Sports Network. I like to talk about sports issues. I don't really like to talk about stuff that's more gossipy in nature and more about what's wrong with you as a personality. Yeah. And so basically all the issues with Valentine in Boston are, do you like Bobby Valentine? Do you not like Bobby Valentine? Do you believe him or not? What was his relationship with this guy or that guy? And those things aren't so much issues as they are kind of assessments of a person's personality, and they have kind of a gossipy tinge to them. And I don't know that I'm always at my best in those situations because I'm just not comfortable with it.
Well, the one thing that you do, and I don't need to tell you this, but others should listen to if they want to do this, is you listen. And it's such a small thing, but it's the most important thing anybody does in an interview, is they just listen, because somebody will tell you something even when they're trying not to tell you something.
Yeah, you pick up not only on what they've said, but what they've implied or what was left unsaid. And, of course, every situation is different. Here we have a little bit of time. On Sunday Night Football, even if I interview the person for 20 minutes, I'm completely aware that the segment that airs is going to be 3.5 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to craft each question so that it could potentially be part of those 3.5 or 4 minutes. And you can kind of hear it. You can hear the Geiger counter sort of move. Yeah, that one will be in. and you sometimes I'll even pause for a second to allow an editing space, or I'll restate a question because I'll know, they'll want to go back and use this answer, but I better restate this way and give them a second shot at it, not for the interviewee's benefit, but for our own benefit, so we can shorten it up a little bit and fit it in the space.
I'm thinking of all the great broadcasters at NBC, and you have Al Michaels, and you got Matt Lauer, and you got all the Tom Brokaw,
Dan Patrick.
Now you have the Danettes. Does it bother you that, you're lumped in with them? Mm-hmm. You okay with that?
I remind you, or maybe you're not even aware, but some years ago, before he left for TBS, when Conan was on NBC, every time I'd come on his show, he would have the Costas heads, who predated the Danettes. The Costas heads would sit in the front row, and they all supposedly dressed like me. Now, I happen to think I'm a little more dapper than what he perceived, but they were all wearing blue blazers, Oxford shirts, and rep ties. And every time I'd say anything, they'd cut to these guys nodding in affirmation, high-fiving, just going nuts over everything I said, and then occasionally they'd get to speak. And they would say something like, Conan, this is a momentous moment. Why? Let me put it in perspective for you.
Well, if you need to loan out the Danettes, I'll be more than happy to give them to you. If you have, just around the house too.
They're versatile. Has the renegotiation gone well? Because I understand that there were some outrageous demands.
Well, you didn't help me on Sunday Night Football when you were talking about these guys wanting to renegotiate, and all of a sudden they're going, I'm getting text after the show. Wait, can we renegotiate? And I went, no, Bob was joking. You were joking.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, you were joking.
These guys are indispensable.
Yeah, well,
limo rides, wardrobe,
movies,
whatever it is.
Yeah,
tickets.
Yeah.
All the perks.
Yeah, I know you'll be on the road. You got Bears and Texans coming up Sunday Night Football. Who are you sitting down to interview?
Tillman and Urlacher from the Bears, given what their defense has been doing, and Arian Foster from the Texans.
But if you had one question to ask Jay Cutler.
One question to ask Jay Cutler.
That's it. One.
You see, I'm not as good as you think I am, but at least I have time to think about it. One question to ask Jay Cutler. What could you do what could you do with a full complement of offensive weapons? How good would you be in an ideal situation? If you were the quarterback of the Packers, could you put up Aaron Rodgers-like numbers? If they plugged you in with Bill Belichick in New England, what would you be?
Look at you. Look at you. I thought you were going to go, what could you do to change somebody's image of who they think you are and who you really are?
You know, I almost thought about that. That was one possibility.
And I didn't mean to be a topper there.
No, that might be the better one.
Okay.
That might be the better one.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you on Sunday.
Let the Danettes decide.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, see you. Bye.
Bob Costas, Football Night in America.